You may remember a popular TV show from a few years ago. It was called the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, the Smothers Comedy Brothers Hour, and different variations of that name. One of the most watched TV shows of all time. It was funny, smart, and way ahead of its time. A lot of people watched every week to enjoy music, laughs, and just a little trouble. Then all of a sudden it was gone. No goodbye episode, no heads up, just quiet. The network said it was because of time constraints, but that's not what happened. As citizens of the United States, our government wants us to stay home instead of going to other countries. It was much messier and more telling what went on behind the scenes than anyone let on. This is the story of how a controversial scene can get even the best show pulled from the air, paving the way for a new kind of comedy show. Sure, I know who the Smothers Brothers are. Along with Ozzie and Harriet, the Smothers Brothers were two of the most famous and controversial TV shows of the 1960s. When it first aired on CBS in February 1967, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour seemed like just another light show in a long line of them. Tommy and Dick Smothers were already famous for their strange musical comedy acts, and they brought a gentle, offbeat energy that worked well in the format of evening variety shows. The show had skits, guest acts, and musical breaks that were all designed to appeal to a wide range of TV viewers. At first glance, it looked harmless, maybe even out of date, but after only a few episodes, it was clear that this show was trying something new and dangerous. Network execs were looking forward to banter and banjos, but the Smothers Brothers delivered satire instead, not just jokes about mothers' favoritism, but harsh criticism of the political and cultural differences in America in the 1960s. As a Trojan horse, the show used entertainment to sneak different points of view into the living rooms of millions of people every Sunday night. As late 1967 came around, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour became one of the most political TV shows. It talked about things that most network shows wouldn't. Government workers were made fun of in sketches. In monologues, people questioned US foreign policy. Guest artists sang and said things that were different from what most people think. This is all on CBS, a network that isn't known for trying new things with counterculture. The change wasn't a mistake. One person, Tommy Smothers, saw the show as a way to tell the truth. As executive producer, he pushed for tougher shows and hired a group of young, politically aware writers, many of whom would change American comedy for decades to come. Frank Miller, Steve Martin, Rob Reiner, and Mason Williams were among the artists who helped shape the show's tone and style behind the scenes. The show stood out in other ways too, like the music. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, unlike other variety shows that favored safe, middle-of-the-road acts, welcomed artists who showed how culture was changing at the time. Pete Seeger, a folk singer who was banned during the McCarthy era, was brought back to network TV for the first time in many years. His performance of Waist Deep in the Big Muddy, which was a thinly hidden attack on US leadership in Vietnam, was initially taken down by CBS, but was later shown after public pressure. Other guests such as The Who, Simon and Garfunkel, and Jefferson Airplane brought a real voice of the youth movement right into American homes. The crowd reacted, ratings went through the roof, especially among younger watchers. As good citizens, our government wants us to stay home instead of going to other countries. The show turned into more than just fun. It happened every week for a group that didn't feel like they were getting to see the story in the mainstream media. People were becoming more and more against the political and cultural status quo, and the Smothers Brothers were a symbol of that. But there was also friction because of that. CBS execs were getting more and more worried about the tone of the show. It was okay to make fun of politics sometimes, but the Smothers Brothers humor show made it a regular thing. The network started to look more closely at the plots and made changes and cuts to controversial parts at the last minute. The staff of the show fought back, often sending in changes just minutes before the show aired to avoid being censored ahead of time. Now everyone could see how artistic freedom and corporate control were at odds with each other. There were fights every show, not just over which jokes would air, but over the right to speak out against power in public. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour had become a sign of the gap between generations by 1968. It was a breath of fresh air for the young, liberal people who watched it. Conservative people who had a stake in CBS saw it as a burden. Then there was the scene that made everything too much, getting worse with CBS. The Smothers Brothers Entertainment Hour became a political flashpoint at the start of 1968. Not only did CBS watch every sketch, monologue and guest appearance, but so did marketers, watchdog groups, and a public that was becoming more and more divided. The show had become one of the most controversial on network TV because it was becoming more open about talking about social and political problems, and for CBS, the heat was getting too much to handle. Tommy Smothers and his brothers had always been on the cutting edge. But as the show went on, that envelope was ripped open all the way, and CBS, like all the other big networks at the time, had to keep a careful balance. Keep the public interested, don't anger sponsors, and most of all, don't anger the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC. Their rising activism, on the other hand, caused problems for all three. There was pressure from the marketers to begin with. Major corporations sponsored the show, and those corporations didn't want their goods to be linked to anti-war talk or criticism of the president at the time. Many older, more traditional viewers found the show offensive or unpatriotic, while younger watchers liked the rebellious tone. A lot of complaints came in. Sponsors said they were worried. Executives at CBS were getting tense behind closed doors. Instead of ending the show completely, CBS tried to keep it in check. In order to avoid too much controversy, the network started to have more control over the material. Some segments were marked. There were fewer or no lines at all. Some artists and ideas were seen as too risky. In return, the Smothers boys fought back. The fight turned into a routine very quickly. CBS made it a rule that each show had to be sent to network censors at least 10 days before it aired. This wasn't normal for entertainment shows, but CBS said it had to be done to keep people safe. What it really was a chokehold. The show had a tight production schedule, and acts were often finished days or even hours before they aired. It was very hard to follow the new rule. Tommy Smothers, who had taken on a lot of creative leadership for the show, thought that the strategy was an attempt to make the show less relevant on purpose. Satire and comedy needed to react to current events, but a 10-day delay took away that urgency. He and the rest of the writing team started using cheat sheets, sending clean copies of scripts to be approved while writing, and filming more racy copies behind the scenes. This caused problems with CBS Standards and Practices Department almost all the time. Often, edited copies of the show were sent to the network just hours before they were to air, leaving CBS with no choice but to air them or cancel at the last minute. Sometimes CBS would replace or black out offensive parts of the show at the last minute without telling the production team ahead of time. In a famous incident, a speech by folk singer Joan Baez was cut at the last minute. In it, she dedicated a song to her husband, anti-draft activist David Harris, who was in jail at the time. These editing fights turned into a war of words over who controls art and who can say political things on American TV. They started to see themselves as more than just entertainers. They saw themselves as culture warriors. Now I'd like to help start the first episode of a great new comedy show. You'll all enjoy for a very long time, with Tom and Dick Smothers in the lead roles. While they were defending their right to be honest about the state of the country, CBS saw them as troublemakers who could damage the network's image and stability. Behind the scenes, Robert Wood, the president of CBS, and other network officials were getting more and more angry. The show was still getting good numbers, but it was becoming too much trouble to be worth it. Every week there was a new fight, a new story in the news, and often more angry calls from supporters or politicians. The makers of the show were often told to tone it down, sometimes in a formal way and sometimes informally. The warnings were mostly ignored, though. The 1968-1969 season was the turning point. After Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy were killed, things in the United States became even more dangerous. Protests against the war got worse. The Democratic National Convention in Chicago turned into a fight that was shown on TV. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour tried to show this chaos in a variety of ways, including by making fun of it and telling the truth. In the middle of all this chaos, CBS started pulling shows without telling anyone. Because Pete Seeger's performance of Waist Deep in the Big Muddy was a thinly veiled attack on President Lyndon Johnson, the show that featured the blacklisted folk singer Pete Seeger returning to national TV after years of unofficial censorship was initially not allowed to run. Even though the song was taken off the show after backlash, it set a standard. CBS would edit things after they were made, if it feared being hurt. It became dangerous to work in this situation. The writer's room had a range of moods from rebellion to burnout. Artists and writers never knew what would be shown on TV or in theatre. Lawyers were brought in to help. There were even rumors that FBI agents were watching the show and that CBS was under political pressure to keep a tighter grip on it. Tommy Smothers felt like the fight was about him. He thought that TV could be a means of making things better, and he wouldn't give up that goal for the sake of corporate comfort. In public appearances, he spoke out more and more, criticizing CBS management and the media industry as a whole. His bluntness, on the other hand, made things worse. In the end, the fight came to a standstill. CBS gave official warnings about following the rules and made it clear that breaking the rules again could lead to termination. The network didn't want the bad press that would come with firing the Smothers Brothers, but they were getting ready for it. There was no longer any trust. CBS was looking for a reason to explain. These people had no idea what was coming their way soon. The controversial speech by David Steinberg. Listen to this now. A part of the Smothers Brothers comedy hour that would become one of the most popular in the show's history aired in October 1968. One that went too far with comedy, got a lot of complaints from viewers, and was the start of the end. The spark was a young comic named David Steinberg who was becoming famous very quickly. David was already famous for the smart, sarcastic humor he used. He was born in Winnipeg, Canada, and grew up in a religious Jewish family. Before becoming a comedian, he studied religion. His past gave him a special edge. He was smart enough to talk about religion and then turn it into sharp satire. Some people thought that made him scary and funny at the same time. One of Steinberg's signature acts, a fake sermon given in the style of an angry preacher, was performed at the October show. He used over-the-top gestures and fake moral anger to make fun of the silly ways that religious stories are often taught or interpreted in it. He talked about the Old Testament and the story of Jonah and the whale. It was common for Jewish comedians to use religious satire as a way to make people laugh, but this version hit especially hard because it aired on a big network on a Sunday night during prime time. David's sermon made me feel something. A lot of viewers complained to CBS. People had said bad things about the Smothers Brothers humor show in the past for having anti-war and political jokes, but this was different. A lot of people didn't talk about religion. For many people, the idea that a comedian on national TV would make fun of sacred texts and act like a preacher was unbelievably offensive. A lot of people wrote and called the network, and many of them wanted an explanation or for the network to be cancelled. The folks at CBS paid attention. After all, the criticism wasn't just coming from a few people. It was now coming from advertisers, religious groups, and local allies. Network brass quickly sent out a message. People were not allowed to preach like David did. The Smothers Brothers had to stay away from religion if they wanted to keep their show on the air. Tommy and his brothers thought this was another way of censoring them. He thought David's act wasn't an attack on religion itself, but rather a joke about how religious stories are used to hurt people. He said that it wasn't any less disrespectful than what Lenny Bruce had said in a bar or what Jonathan Swift had written hundreds of years before. Satire wasn't meant to make people feel better, it was meant to ask. Even though the network told Tommy not to, he stuck with David's funny voice. He thought the show's job wasn't just to entertain people, but also to push them. Tommy didn't think twice when the chance came up to have David back for another guest appearance in March 1969. This time, David gave another satirical lecture with the same rude tone as the first one. He talked about characters and ideas from the Bible and questioned how literally religious stories were taken. An actual crowd was there to hear the sermon, and they laughed and cheered. It was smart, funny, and made me think. Tomas' favorite parts of the show were at their best. But CBS never showed it. While the show was still to air, CBS pulled it. Executives pointed to the deal from before as proof that there would be no more David sermons. The network had let political satire, social commentary, and even messages that were against the system go through. But a second religious comedy so soon after the first was seen as a protest. At this point, things broke down very badly, when things between the show and the network were already tense. From a production point of view, CBS move to block the episode was more than just changing some words. It was like putting the episode on a silent blacklist. The show had already been recorded, cut, and was ready to air. It was strange to pull it so close to air, and doing it without consulting the producer made things worse. The Smothers brothers were not told ahead of time. This was the last straw for the network. It was a surprise attack on the Smothers brothers. The episode that was never shown became a symbol of the larger fight between creativity and business control. In interviews with the press that followed, Tommy spoke out against how CBS handled the case. He said that the network was weak, that it was stifling cultural expression, and that it gave in to pressure from conservative groups. He supported David and the choice to show the speech. He said that satire was less satire and more play for comfort if it couldn't touch on religion. It's funny because David became more well-known because of the fuss. His name became linked to questioning authority, and his sermons were used and quoted in underground newspapers and student magazines all over the country. For the Smothers boys, though, the effects came faster. The show can't go on. On April 4, 1969, CBS ended the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour with no notice. The network's stated reason was a matter of following the rules. A lot of times, the show didn't turn in finished episodes in time for CBS required pre-air review process. Of course, that reasoning didn't make sense to anyone who was paying attention. For a long time, the Smothers brothers didn't agree with CBS stricter editing rules. There had been delivery delays, sometimes by minutes and sometimes by hours, but those were only effects and not causes. The real disagreement was about the topic, and when it was cancelled, it didn't feel like a decision about when to hold the event. It felt more like a way to silence people. The show had been picked up for another season, from 1969 to 1970, just days before the news. Plans were made and contracts were signed. Over 90% of the advertising space for the next season had already been taken. In terms of TV, this meant that the show was safe and making money. No one stops a hit unless they have a good reason. This scene caused a lot of trouble, which is why the Smothers Brothers humor show was taken off the air for good. The network couldn't handle it because they were getting more and more worried about the show's political content and public image. The satirical lectures, commentaries, and harsh criticisms of American institutions that David gave, all of that made the show a news story. There was more. Reports say that the show that got buried also had a performance by Linda Ronstadt, who was a rising star in the folk rock scene at the time. She wasn't into politics. She wasn't being funny. She was a truly amazing young artist who gave a groundbreaking show on national TV. She was, let's say, not as covered as she should have been at the time. She did have on a short dress. And this was a big no-no back then, even though it sounds crazy now. When CBS pulled the March 1969 show, it sent a clear message. When Tommy Smothers kept pushing the limits of the network even further, he crossed the line. Because of this, CBS turned off the show. Based on all the facts, it was clearly revenge. Now the network tried to make the cancelling seem like it was necessary to follow the rules. A lot of people came to agree that the answer was clear. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour had become too unpredictable, too outspoken, and too independent for a network like CBS that depended on customer service and advertising from businesses. There wasn't going to be another fight over control on the network. It did not want more news stories about songs against war or religious comedy. They wanted to be in charge, but the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour stopped them. Damage and court cases. The Smothers Brothers didn't take it lying down when CBS suddenly cancelled their show. In 1970, the Smothers Brothers sued CBS for breaking a deal they had made. Their claim was easy to understand. The network had already agreed to sell ads for the next season of the show, but they suddenly cancelled it for no good reason. CBS said that the Smotherses didn't deliver the shows on time, but they said that this was just an excuse. They really did it because of the topic, which was political. They said CBS was looking for any reason to cancel a show that was hurting their image and were having trouble with the law. But in 1973, a federal court agreed with the brothers and said that CBS had broken their contract. The court gave them nearly $800,000 in penalties, which was a win, but only in a symbolic way. Their TV business was already in bad shape by that point. The cancellation sent a scary message through the entertainment business. It was risky to show political comedy during prime time, especially satire that went left or criticized the Vietnam War. Advertisers and executives became more careful. Artists and writers paid attention. This was the line between being brave and being too much to handle. And the Smothers Brothers were the story that taught us a lesson. In the early 1970s, comedy on TV tended to stay on safer ground. Apolitical humor was a big hit on variety shows like The Carol Burnett Show. All in the Family by Norman Lear made political and social comments when it first aired in 1971. But it was carefully packaged with the promise that Archie Bunker's views were being made fun of, not pushed. They were the only ones on TV who really pushed, and after what happened to them, not many people dared to try. The brothers had long-lasting effects on their own lives. They were still popular as live performers, but their bond with TV was broken. A big network didn't want to bring them back as a star. They tried to bring their act back to life on TV, but it didn't work out very well, and they never had the creative freedom they had at CBS. Tommy, who spoke out more about politics than the other guy, felt it the most. In Hollywood, he was known for being difficult, which usually means he was ready to fight back. And in a town where people are afraid to take risks and follow the rules, that was the end of a career. Even though Dick was always the calmer brother, he kept working regularly, but even he knew that doors had quietly shut after 1969. The brothers then moved. They did more live shows, going to schools, concert halls and comedy clubs all over the country. Their fans never went away. If anything, the trouble made them more famous. People in the audience knew what had happened, which gave the show a sense of moral defiance. In the age of TV, they died for free speech. The field changed over the next few years. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, satire had moved on to late-night shows and cable TV, where content standards were less strict. The Smothers Boys had missed that chance, though. It wasn't ready for them because they were ahead of their time. Still, the court's decision made them right. CBS did not follow the rules. They were telling the truth. And by doing that, they showed how fragile artistic freedom can be when it is hampered by business concerns. They fought for a cause. They lost the stage, but they won the big picture of history. Leave behind justice and the long shade. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour is known not only as a TV show, but also as a turning point in the history of American broadcast media. It has been off the air for more than 50 years. What started out as a singing variety show became a model for modern political satire. Its sudden cancellation became a case study of how limited creative freedom can be when corporations run things. If you think about it, the show's DNA can be found in every big satirical platform that came after it. You might not have had Saturday Night Live if the Smothers Brothers hadn't pushed the limits of what TV could say and what it could risk. Since its first episode in 1975, that show has carried on the spirit of subversion by hiding serious messages behind sketch humor. After many years, shows like The Daily Show, Last Week Tonight, and many more would build on the idea that humor could be a serious political tool. The Smothers Brothers were unique because they used fun to say important things and wouldn't stop even when told to. It was they who turned TV from a harmless form of fun into a serious medium, and the backlash showed how strong that change could be. Their control still has an effect on culture. The Vietnam War was tearing the country apart, but the civil rights movement was changing the way people lived. People who weren't getting press elsewhere could be heard on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. It put songs, protests, and social criticism on national TV, which made CBS and its viewers deal with an imperfect and upsetting view of America. When CBS shut them down, it showed that even a network TV station had boundaries. The criticism they got showed a simple truth. People are more likely to fight back when the word is honest. That conflict between sharing the truth and managing risks is still going on. At some point, the Smothers were proven right. They got praise like an Emmy for their writing on the show and stood ovations during interviews and retrospectives. They kept telling people what had happened and why it was important. Do you think their impact is bigger than one mean band sketch in the end? Share your thoughts below.